Well, Dave Kluge, the Josh Dobbs magic is done. Justin Fields and the Bears win. How'd you feel about that one, buddy?
It hurt their draft stock and it injected just enough hope into the fan base. If I have to hear one more person say that the Bears are only 2 games out of the playoffs, I'm going to lose it, Alfredo. I'm going to lose it. Playoffs and Bears should not be a conversation this year. Get out of here.
I love it. They're simultaneously. They're 2 games out of the playoffs, but you're also like 2 games out of being a top 3 pick.
Yeah, yeah.
It feels like that's perennially where the Bears are. I'm sorry to hear that. But we're gonna
Football
take a look.
purgatory. That is where they live.
Yeah, don't worry. That's where my Dolphins were for years and years. I
Ugh.
totally get it. We're going to take a look at all of the action from week 12 here with our Tuesday takeaways. If you're looking for waiver wire stuff, we did that yesterday. So go check out that episode. It's a little bit shorter. You can check out all that. We talk about, what was it, Dave? Like 15 different players you can go pick up off the waiver wire, even some guys that are available in 99% of leagues. And we'll also rehash. Yeah, there's more players you can drop, but we're going to rehash some of those names here today, even give you some new ones that you can go pick up off the waiver wire. So first game I want to take a look at here is last night's Monday Night Football game. Chicago Bears at Minnesota Vikings. Bears win. Like I said, the Josh Dobbs magic is done. He didn't really get any help from his receivers there. Some of the receivers were batting up balls, but either way, it just did not look good for the Vikings. On the other side, though, DJ Moore. Dave, hats off. Pat yourself on the back. 2 hands on the back. And then I hope you fall out of your chair. DJ Moore remains a top 12 wide receiver right now. I mean, he continues to do it. The target volume he's getting, he looked great last night.
Let me just read a quick stat to you. Obviously we looked at a little stint through midseason where Tyson Bagent was starting, and the target volume remained pretty consistent with Tyson Bagent, but the target quality wasn't as good. DJ Moore didn't score a single touchdown in those games. If we look at the 7-game sample here where DJ Moore has played with Justin Fields, his 17-game pace, 136 targets, 109 receptions, 1,800 yards, and 15 touchdowns. That would be the 7th most receiving yards in NFL history and the 23rd most touchdowns in a single season in NFL history. Now, obviously, some of that is weighed by that really big game against Washington. And then we've also can look at week 1 where he did almost nothing in the passing game as well. But overall, man, I think this is just a really good pairing. I think DJ Moore's after the catch abilities and his ability to stretch the field pair up really well with what Justin Fields has done. I'm hoping that this can kind of be the next Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Jalen Hurts, and A.J. Brown, that next type of duo in the NFL.
So you say you're hoping that, but
I mean, it already
as
is.
a Bears fan, well, as a Bears fan, though, like, what are the odds that we don't even see Justin Fields as the quarterback next year?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot this offseason, and let's just enjoy the ride for now heading into week 13. But we talked about this today in base camp or kind of internal football guys chat, and I said, I think what the Bears should do if they do end up with the number 1 overall pick is just take Caleb Williams, figure it out afterwards. I mean, maybe Caleb Williams is a guy, maybe Justin Fields is a guy. I don't think you can pass on a talent like Caleb Williams in the draft if you have the number 1 overall pick. But there's also no guarantee. We hear the term can't miss prospect all the time, and a lot of these can't miss prospects do in fact miss. So I think the best thing to do is just take Caleb Williams. I don't think you should trade Justin Fields away for pennies on the dollar. I think that would be foolish, but let both of these guys go into camp, figure it out after the fact. It'll be a media circus, especially with the way Chicago and these media outlets kind of blow things out of proportion, but I think that's the thing to do. Justin Fields has shown enough promise that you could potentially build a team around him. Caleb Williams is too good of a prospect to pass on, so have them both. See what happens. Figure it out after.
Yeah, what ship didn't set sail without 2 captains? Where would Catholicism be without the popes? Just get 2 quarterbacks in there. It always works. We also saw in the backfield for the Bears, Roschon Johnson got. Why did I pronounce it like that? Roschon Johnson got 75% of the snaps in this game. It certainly looks like there could be a changing of the guard here in the backfield. I mean, there's also some things, right? Like this was a very blitz heavy attack from the Minnesota Vikings defense. So I'm sure they wanted to give a look that made that defense think they could be passing on any given down. Khalil Herbert's also coming back from the injury. There's no Deonta Foreman, Dave. So, I mean, we mentioned all these things. Roschon Johnson is a guy that we did not talk about in the Week 13 waiver wire episode yesterday, but he still remains available in nearly 70% of sleeper leagues. So I know there's some tough matchups coming up, Detroit and Cleveland, and they're going to be on a bye this week in Week 13. So would Roschon Johnson be a guy that you'd bump to the top of the waiver wire priority list here?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that I think I just kind of stopped talking about because I was sick of talking about him. Big fan of the talent. I think that the opportunity could be here. I think that he is a very, very good running back. But I do want to say, no news has come out about it yet, but it wouldn't shock me if we find out maybe even later today or tomorrow that Khalil Herbert might have tweaked something because Khalil Herbert was getting the early touches. And then as the game went on, we saw a lot more Roschon Johnson and a lot less of Khalil Herbert. So maybe something happened where he wasn't feeling right with that ankle. I'm not sure exactly what was going on, but I mean, yeah, Roschon Johnson outsnapped Khalil Herbert 51-15 yesterday, which is pretty crazy to see. I'm just not ready to say Roschon Johnson, as much as I would love to, don't get me wrong, as much as
Yeah.
I'd love to say Roschon Johnson took over the backfield, I think this could have been injury related. So I'm going to wait until a little bit later in the week before I get too over my skis with Roschon.
We'll keep our eyes on that as the week goes on. But we got some other big news in terms of running back injuries, and I want to do this as we go to our next game. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Indianapolis Colts, and Ian Rappaport is reporting this morning that Jonathan Taylor suffered an injured thumb that is going to require further evaluation and put his status in doubt going forward. It's the wording of that, put his status in doubt going forward. Not that he would miss a week or 2 weeks, but put his status in doubt going forward. That's absolutely terrifying, Dave.
I hate it here. I am not having a good
Yep.
time. Like we held on to Jonathan Taylor through the holdout or whatever it was. We held on to him through the slow ramp up phase with Zach Moss, where they were splitting touches. And then for the last 3 weeks, we saw Jonathan Taylor in a much bigger role. Granted, it diminished a little bit last week. I'm wondering if that had to do with this thumb injury. But in the 2 weeks leading up to week 12, we saw it, pretty much Jonathan Taylor back in his workhorse role where he was getting, around 80% of the snaps. He was getting the majority of the touches. We were saying Zach Moss has now been relegated to handcuff, area again. We're not really thinking about starting Zach Moss anymore. This is worrisome, but I think if anything, we were, again, didn't talk about Zach Moss on our waiver show, but if Zach Moss was dropped by a manager, I think he is the guy that's atop the waiver priority now, putting him ahead of Keaton Mitchell, putting him ahead of Jaden Reed, putting him ahead of all of those guys. We saw Zach Moss giving us consistent RB1 production when Jonathan Taylor wasn't there behind that offensive line. And now with Gardner Minshew taking even fewer high value touches, Zach Moss, top 10 running back rest of the season if Jonathan Taylor can't play. Is that crazy to say?
I mean, he was certainly really good when he had that opportunity. He was averaging 17 PPR points per
Whew.
game in that time where he was starting without Jonathan Taylor. So, yeah, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Zach Moss becomes a top 12 fantasy running back for the rest of the season if he has to take over. He's currently available in 52% of sleeper leagues, 41% of ESPN leagues, and 51% of Yahoo leagues. So, Zach Moss is still out there for a lot of people who might have dropped him. And those of you that stashed him, held on to him, held out hope, whatever it may be, or you handcuff Jonathan Taylor with Zach Moss. It looks like that time is finally coming to fruition for you. And listen, we hope for the best with Jonathan Taylor. I really do.
Of
The
course.
NFL and the Colts and everything is just better when Jonathan Taylor is playing, and so I really hope that he's still going to be out there. But if for any reason he does have to miss time, or this, I hate the way that this tweet was worded by Ian Rappaport. Puts his status in doubt going forward. I absolutely hate the
Hopefully
way
this
that
is a
was
lot
put.
of nothing. Hopefully they come back tomorrow and they just say, hey, results came back good and there's nothing to worry about here. Jonathan Taylor's going to be fine. But that wording is scary.
Yeah, I would say that's the scariest thing there. And then last thing on this game, not really anything to report from the Bucs side. It was kind of just business as usual. Rashad White got plenty of his touches, and Mike Evans is still very good at football. But on the Colts side, Josh Downs back to normal in terms of his snap share and what he was doing out there on the field. Doesn't seem like the injury is hampering him anymore. 12 targets in the day. It wasn't a very efficient game for him. He still didn't end up with too many yards here, but 12 targets, he's right up there. He and Michael Pittman are basically the lone target hogs on that team.
Yeah. I mean, Josh Downs has been great this year. I think his play style matches very well with Gardner Minshew. Talked about him a
Mhm.
lot on the waiver wire show. I don't think he's really somebody that we're talking about on the waiver wire show at this point. He's been picked up in most leagues. He's been getting a solid wide receiver two production. Really excited long term to see like what he can grow into. Had kind of a slow start to the season, but is looking like he belongs in the NFL right now. Really excited to see what this punch can look like with Pittman and Downs going into next year, hopefully with Anthony Richardson back. The last thing, real quickly, I just want to sneak this in. Rashad White, 100-yard rushing game. He has been doing most of his damage through the air in recent weeks, but he was a guy that we were both talking early in the season about his inefficiencies as a running back. This wasn't the toughest matchup, and I think he kind of took advantage of the matchup a little bit on the ground. But man, since week 8, Kyren Williams, obviously with his one game, is the number one running back, but then Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs, and then Rachaad White is 4th in points per game since week 8. We've really seen his role change. We've seen him become a much more efficient running back. So Rachaad White was a guy I wasn't too high on this preseason or even early in the year, but man, he has proven me wrong, looking really, really good over the last month or so.
Well, I think that what you see, and this is typical with football players, is that they, especially at the running back position, that they do tend to get better as the season goes on because they find themselves into a rhythm. They find that they kind of know a little bit better how to read the blocks for specific plays and kind of how to read the butts of their offensive linemen. They get a better feel for the timing of everything. And so some of these guys that we talked about earlier in the season who said, "Hey, they're really not the most efficient runners," but the volume was kind of holding them up, and that was Kyren Williams. That was Rachaad White. That's still
Let's save the
happening.
Kyren Williams talk because I got some good nuggets to drop when we
Don't
talk
don't
about
worry,
Kyren
don't worry.
Williams.
We'll save it. We'll save it. We'll save it. We'll stay on task for you here. Let's go to the next game. Kansas City at Las Vegas, and I know this hasn't been the same Chiefs team that we are used to, but we kind of got to see something where we really got to see a couple of guys take over some fantasy football roles this past weekend because of injury and because of players being out. So the first one I want to take a look at here, Isaiah Pacheco. He got 78% of the snaps at the running back spot most of the season for him this year. That was with Jerick McKinnon out. Typically, Pacheco is hovering closer to about 60%. Clyde Edwards-Helaire did not really look good in place of Jerick McKinnon, but Pacheco started to get a bit more of the goal line work that we hadn't really seen him get. He had been getting taken out near the goal line, and he got a bit more of that receiving work that had been a little wishy-washy, Dave. So I know that you're a big fan of Isaiah Pacheco. I know that you in the past have said that you don't really care if Jerick McKinnon is active, that you still believe Isaiah Pacheco is going to continue to get his, so to speak, right? Is that something that you think is going to continue happening? Like, are we seeing once again a changing of the guard here in the backfield in Kansas City?
No, and I see a lot of people expecting that because we saw it last year where Isaiah Pacheco came on, or I'm sorry, where Jerick McKinnon came on much
Yep.
stronger as the season progressed. But Jerick McKinnon hasn't looked like the same player this year. I think the age is finally catching up to him. And meanwhile, Pacheco looks much better than he did last year, has tripled his target share, more efficient across the board. He's seen his snaps going up as the season goes on. So I think Andy Reid is finally doing the smart thing here. I think the two best players on this team, don't get me wrong, Travis Kelce is going to do what he does and find those soft spots in the zone, and he's going to be that safety blanket for Patrick Mahomes. But I think the two playmakers on this team are Isaiah Pacheco and Rashee Rice. And we finally saw it here in week 13. It took until 3/4 of the way through the season for Andy Reid to say, hey, let me try to get the ball in Pacheco and Rice's hands and see what can happen. And all of a sudden, this Chiefs offense looked really, really good this week.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that, I mean, how much it comes from the fact that there was no Mecole Hardman, no Kadarius Toney. We see, not that those guys are world beaters
And
by
no
any stretch
Jerick
of the
McKinnon.
imagination.
Yeah.
Right, and no Jerick McKinnon. So I mean, like, I get it. You have 3 pass catchers missing, but Rashee Rice then goes out there, had the most snaps of the wide receivers, most routes run, most targets.
But
Uh
they didn't
let,
force feed 12 targets to Justin Watson, which is good. They went to Rashee Rice instead of Justin Watson like we saw
and,
2
and
weeks ago.
and that's the thing. Like, that's what still worries me is that I want to believe in Rashee Rice, and I want to say that he's now the new Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver. But we also saw them just force feed Justin Watson a few weeks ago, and we've kind of seen we never quite know what to expect with this Chiefs offense, and it's a little frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And I still think, you just got to bet on the talent here. Marquez Valdes-Scantling probably isn't that talented. Justin Watson isn't that talented. Kadarius Toney shown some flashes, and Sky Moore, he finds the end zone every now and then. But I think if you were to rank all of these guys talent-wise, I think Rashee Rice is just tiers above the rest of the receivers here. So that's what it comes down to for me. If I'm betting on the talent, Rashee Rice is the most talented guy. So I don't know if any of these guys are going to give you any sort of consistency throughout the rest of the season. And there's probably not going to be any consistency with Rashee Rice. But as we saw last week, he can boom for 100 plus yards and a touchdown. And I don't know if you're going to see that from a lot of these other receivers in Kansas City.
And I think an underrated thing that not enough people talk about when it comes to these receivers is how much the quarterback actually trusts them. I think going back a couple weeks and remembering all those drops that were had at the end of the Chiefs game, and How, we talk about how the Chiefs are 3 drops away from being an undefeated team on the season. At some point, Patrick Mahomes just gets tired of throwing the ball to guys that are dropping it. And so Rashee Rice has improved with that over the season. He's gotten a little bit better. So we could be seeing a little bit of a changing of the guard over there. Let's go to the next game here. Buffalo at Philly. Dave, right now, Jalen Hurts is the front runner for MVP in the NFL. Would he be your pick, or are you maybe looking somewhere else?
That's such a loaded question. We could have an entire show on what the
You have
MVP
15 seconds.
means
Go.
and who should. I think Tyreek Hill should be the MVP, if I'm being honest. I mean, I
Mm.
thought Cooper Kupp should have been the MVP 2 years ago when he hit the Triple Crown, and now Tyreek Hill, if he can surpass 2,000 yards. But we've seen the MVP award isn't the most valuable player award. The MVP award is who's the quarterback that was good on one of the best teams. And yeah,
Who's the
that's
quarterback that's been good
Jalen
for the last
Hurts.
8 weeks of the season,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah. Right
that's
now, it looks like Jalen Hurts, but I think the reason he's the front runner is because Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen are both having down years. CJ Stroud has been great, but he's a rookie, and the Texans have lost some games that they should have won, so I think that takes him out of the consideration as well. Dak Prescott, he might be up there with Jalen Hurts, as kind of the 1B in the conversation here. But I really think what it comes down to, the reason Jalen Hurts is probably going to win it this year is because a lot of the other competition has been pretty soft. I think Lamar Jackson is another guy you could throw in the conversation, but I think that's what it's going to come down to. Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Lamar Jackson, whoever has the best stretch of games in weeks 16, 17, and 18 is probably going to end up with the award.
yeah, I think that right now I might lean more towards Dak Prescott just because of
Mhm.
how good he is. Like I'm taking a look at it right now. 4
Yeah.
touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns. And it's just been astronomical games where so many of these are over 300 yards passing. And I know like that's just such a simple way to look at it, but this also isn't a very nuanced award. It's a pretty simple award where you're looking at which guy's winning, which guy means the most for their team. I think
There's
it's
so
just going to
much
come down
narrative in
to
it too. They're going
yeah,
to
it's
say,
whichever guy's going to be the better story.
Jalen Hurts second in MVP voting last year, and then this year he was able to beat Patrick Mahomes. So now we need to get, man. Like I said, we could talk a lot about MVP. I think it's a stupid award. I really hate the way give it to Tyreek Hill. Come on, make a splash and give it
Love
to
it.
Tyreek Hill, the guy who really deserves the MVP this year, the guy who is clearly the most valuable player on his team.
Especially if he goes out there and breaks the record for 2,000 receiving yards like that. I would
Yeah.
just, yeah,
I
he
know
would
you'd hate to
100%
see this,
deserve it.
Alfredo, but what I want to see is one game where Tyreek Hill can't play due to injury or something like that. Miami to go out and sputter for like 98 passing yards, score 3 points, and just prove
What's your
how
problem?
valuable Tyreek Hill is
What's
to
your
this
problem?
offense.
What's your problem? Why are you trying to trigger me right now? Okay, the Dolphins have looked fine even when he hasn't been on the field. Just shut up. Just shut up. Stop saying things. Let's. I want to take a look at the rest of the players in this game. On the other side of the ball, what are the Bills doing, man? Gabe Davis led the Bills in targets.
Nope.
I I put
Nope.
this in the show sheet. Like he's still
Mm-mm.
a fugazi. He's I no.
Yeah,
I
I'm
won't
not
do
buying
it.
into it. I'm
I
not.
won't do it.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything actionable you can do. Like you're not adding Gabe Davis, but I'm saying like if you have him on your roster, I struggle to consider starting him.
Here, I'll give you some actionable advice with Gabe Davis. Next year in the offseason, target Gabe Davis in your best ball leagues. And then when you're in your managed season long leagues where you actually have to set a lineup every single week, don't even think about touching Gabe Davis. Best ball where you don't have to worry about it, you get those spike weeks and then you have other
Yep.
people that'll
Yep.
kind of cover up the down weeks. That's great, but you do not want to have to rely on this guy weekly in your fantasy lineup. There's the actionable advice for Gabe Davis.
There it is. And we still see Khalil Shakir. His role continues to grow. He went up to 80% of the
Ooh,
snaps now. That
I
might
love
change
that
a
man.
little bit. I do too. I do worry how much that might change a little bit when Dawson Knox
Yeah.
returns. Stephon Diggs, he finally had himself a good game. He dropped 2 passes in overtime. I know that it was a wet, rainy game, but 2 passes in overtime that would have probably sealed the deal for the Bills. And just things still just are so awkward and weird in Buffalo right now. But they still have a shot to make the playoffs. They still have a shot.
Technically.
Josh Allen, but yeah, technically.
Mathematically, they're still in it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the AFC sucks, man. But Josh Allen and the Bills, they have a bye next week in week 13. And then 2 tough matchups versus Kansas City and Dallas in the following weeks. So someone looking for a Josh Allen replacement at quarterback. I'm asking for a friend named Alfredo. Um, he's looking for a quarterback replacement this week. Who would you be picking between, let's say, the guys that are like on waivers typically at quarterback? So let's Jordan,
Hypothetically, in
hypothetically,
Schmalfredo's league, yeah.
yeah, in Schmanasy football, Jordan Love or Russell Wilson. So Jordan Love versus Kansas City, which could be a shootout, or Russell Wilson versus Houston, which could also be a shootout.
Now, I haven't gone through my rankings yet, but my gut is telling me I'd lean with Russell Wilson here, who's kind of been like a high-end QB2, low-end QB1 in most of his matchups, but we know that Houston games have typically been shootouts throughout the season. Jordan Love, when we see Jordan Love struggle, it's when defenses and pass rushes are able to get pressure on him, and that's what KC has done best this year. They've also got some great corners who can shut down these guys in Green Bay. So I think if you're looking for a safer play, I'd probably go with Russell Wilson. He might not be putting up a 35-point game or anything like that, but I think he's going to give you a low-end QB1 production. The floor with Jordan Love is what scares me. I think that he could just get completely dismantled by this Kansas City Chiefs defense, their pass rush, and their secondary, and you could be looking at a pretty down game from Love.
No, there you go. If you got Josh Allen on a bye next week, you got some options there on the waiver wire. Let's take a look at Baltimore at the Chargers. Keenan Allen, we talked about this yesterday. He was basically the entire offense for the Chargers. 14 catches, on 16 targets. Josh
Started the
Palmer
game
comes
12
back.
for 12, I believe, right? Like caught
Yeah,
12 of 12 targets. My goodness.
And the crazy thing is that as a defense, I know the Baltimore Ravens have a good defense. Just as a defense, how do you not just be like, you know what? Let's just cover him. Let's not even cover
They were
anyone
double
else.
teaming him at times, and he was still getting open and catching passes. And we
I
talked
love it.
about it so much this season, especially early in the year when like Keenan Allen was really surprising people with his production. But Kellen Moore gets so creative with him. You see him constantly putting him in motion and trying to get him mismatched against linebackers, doing whatever they can. Like they're not just saying line up out wide and beat your man off press coverage. They are doing whatever they can pre-snap to get him in a position to win. And it's been a thing of beauty. Oh, Keenan Allen this year. Just absolutely love to see it.
For those of you that are listening and not watching, Dave kissed his hands and did the chef's kiss. That's what he did there.
Almost did the Tommy DeVito.
Almost did the Vito, eh? So, Dave, we got some math in, some data, some analytics. The analytics
I love
likes
numbers.
this.
Let's talk numbers.
Yeah, numbers, spreadsheets, math. The Austin Ekeler run from week 11. Remember when we talked about how it just looked really, really slow? We got the data. 13 miles per hour on that run, which was evidenced to be slower than one of his offensive linemen running the 40-yard dash for the NFL Combine. Austin Ekeler has been kind of a weird enigma this season. He got his highest snap share of the season here at 80%, but another inefficient day running, just barely over 3 yards per carry. He lost a fumble on a reception. Running back 31 on the week. Now, the weird thing here is he's still running back 9 in points per game on the season. He's had 4 games inside the top 6 and 4 games outside the top 24. He's had multiple ankle injuries this season. So, I mean, there's not really much that we can do. You're never going to bench Austin Ekeler, but I want to get your opinion on this. Do you think this is more injury that's affecting Austin Ekeler, or is this something that if you're in Dynasty or you're prepping for drafts next year, you're just like, I think he might be done?
Looking at next year, yeah, I'd be a little bit concerned. I don't know off the top of my head. Is he 28 right now? He'll be 29 next year. That's a scary age for running backs, especially undersized running backs like Austin Ekeler. Again, we talked about that one play, the 13-mile-an-hour play that everybody was blowing up on social media and saying he looked like a lineman. He was gassed. I think that's all it was. I think he should have been on the bench. I
don't know.
really
Have
think
you watched that game yet?
I have.
The Chargers Baltimore game?
Yeah, and Baltimore's got a great
Didn't look great.
defense, and they were doing a good job kind of bottling him up, and he didn't have a lot
But
of passing lanes.
he was really lacking that explosion, man. Like even on just like the normal handoffs, it didn't look like the same guy that we've seen. I know that Austin's never been a very efficient runner. He's always been a good weapon to use out of the backfield in passing situations, but I do think that it looked like he was a step slow. I tend to lean more towards the side of he's probably just injured still.
And I don't think this is the ankle injury that set him out earlier in the year because, like we talked about, against Chicago, he had a play where he caught a pass on the sidelines, ripped up the sidelines, and
Well, he had a second injury. He had a second ankle injury later on in the year. Yeah. So he had the high ankle sprain,
So I
which
missed
kept him
that.
out for
I
4
knew he had the
games.
high ankle sprain, and I was going to say because Chicago Jets Lions, in those 3 games, he looked like the Austin Ekeler of old. Like, I have
Yeah,
no
and then
concerns there. I didn't know he picked up a second injury, so shame on
it
me
was
for not
like
doing my homework.
mid October where he went from having a high ankle sprain to a low ankle sprain. I don't remember if it was the
Oh,
same ankle or not, but I think that stuff is just starting to build up on him, which just kind of sucks to see.
yeah.
But let's talk about happy things. No more sad stuff. On
Zay
the other side
Flowers?
of the ball, yes, Zay Flowers.
Yes. Woo!
Zay Flowers, happiness. Keaton Mitchell. These two guys seem to be the biggest
Yes.
beneficiaries of the unfortunate Mark Andrews absence. But I mean, these two guys, they combined for 19 opportunities in the game, Dave. Flowers led the team in targets. Mitchell led the team in carries. You got to think these young guys, we always see it. Rookies get more usage coming out of the bye week. The Ravens are going into a bye week now. You got to assume week 14, these two players might be getting a ton of usage after that bye week.
Hope so. I mean, again, this is, I'm gonna say a lot of the same things I said when I was talking about the Chiefs. Isaiah Pacheco, Rashee Rice, clearly the most talented players on the team. Right now, Keaton Mitchell and Zay Flowers are clearly the most talented players on the team. Like, don't get me wrong, Odell has looked good, but just one injury after another with him. Rashad Bateman, I don't know if the injuries are just piling up, but he's lost a step. He is not the first round talent they drafted him to be a few years ago. Zay Flowers is their best wide receiver. Keaton Mitchell is their best running back. Keep it simple, stupid. Like, we don't have to think about this too hard. Let's
Hey,
get the ball
hey,
in our
don't
best playmakers' hands.
you don't have to resort
KISS.
to name calling. You don't have to be mean.
You're not familiar with the KISS mantra?
Yeah, we changed to keep it super simple, so that way you don't have to
Oh,
call someone
okay.
stupid. You're rude.
Yes. I'm sorry. I'm
You're
a
rude.
millennial. We just have rotten blood, and we say the mean things, and that's what I heard in 3rd grade. And I've just paired it. Keep it super simple, John Harbaugh.
I identify as Gen Z, and I was offended by it.
All right, keep it super simple, John Harbaugh. Get the ball in Keaton Mitchell's hands. Get the ball in Zay Flowers' hands.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say, Zay Flowers, so good, so talented. He does these really fun things after the catch. We saw him get a touchdown out of the backfield, which was cool to see as well. His calling card in college was catching deep passes. And he and Lamar just haven't been able to get on that page so far this year, which is so frustrating to see. Like, we saw the one game earlier in the season, the windy game where the ball kind of got blown in midair, and he was unable to pull that one in. And then last week, we saw a perfectly thrown deep ball that bounced out of his hands that could have been a deep shot. So, like I said, that was Zay Flowers' calling card in college, was his big playability on deep balls. And we haven't seen that so far. So I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. Again, kind of reminds me of Monroe St. Brown his first 2 years, where he can do the short and intermediate stuff. He can make plays after the catch, but we really want to see the ceiling unlocked when he can start winning deep and catching deep balls.
Now, next game, talking about another really impressive rookie, Saints at Falcons. Dave, I'm at the point here. I really want to trust Bijan Robinson, and it's not like you're not going to start him. This is another one of those guys. You're going to start him every single week. But now we've got back-to-back games with 19 plus touches. And it looks like Arthur Smith is finally giving Bijan the touches that he needs. The Falcons are set to make the playoffs. They're set to win their division right now if they just continue to. They don't have to necessarily win out, but they kind of control their own destiny at this point. I hate that phrase, but it's true. Like, that's where they're at. And with Desmond Ridder in there, he's not great, but he's targeting Bijan Robinson quite a bit more. He's targeting him about 5.5 times per game compared to Taylor Heineke, who was at 3.5. And those 2 extra receptions potentially per game make a big difference for a guy like Bijan Robinson, who's already super talented. So to get the ball in his hands 2 more times in space, yeah, I'll sign up for that every single day.
And you talk about them controlling their own destiny. You look at their schedule for the rest of the season. They got the Jets next week, then Tampa Bay, then Carolina, then Indianapolis, then Chicago, then New Orleans. It's not crazy to think that Atlanta could literally win out for the rest of this year. They've got a pretty soft schedule. But yeah, man, Bijan Robinson, like you said, it's not like you're thinking about benching him. We've seen the ceiling for the last 2 weeks, but also Arthur Smith shenanigans. Don't be surprised if one of these game scripts in these coming weeks, Tyler Algier gets 15 touches and Bijan Robinson is an afterthought. That's just how Arthur Smith operates. So you got to live with the highs and the lows with Bijan Robinson. Amazing playmaker. Like, talent wise, I don't think it's even a hot take to say that he's the best running back in football, but the usage is just going to continue to make you pull your hair out every now and then.
Other side of the football, New Orleans Saints had just a ton of injuries, and it just felt like there was a time, Dave, where Chris Olave was in the blue medical tent, and then another player, their center, Eric McCoy, was going into the blue medical
Uh-huh.
tent, and he had to just like wait outside as they were getting there, like had to shift them out. And there was just so many players going in and out of the blue medical tent. So we see Chris Olave leave with a concussion, and it was ruled really quickly that he had a concussion. And we already know this, that not many of the players who get a concussion, I think
Yeah.
if I remember correctly with Adam
I
Hutchinson,
think
it
it's
was
been
about
like 2 or 3
22.
all year.
Yeah, it's like roughly 22% or possibly even lower that actually returned to play within the week. I know we saw Alexander Madison do it recently, so it's not out of
Wow,
the
30.
question. But yeah. And you already got Michael Thomas on IR. You've got Chris Olave with a concussion. And then now you end up with Rashid Shaheed, who's got a thigh injury, some sort of a leg injury where he was limping off the field. I mean, we're down to Keith Kirkwood and A.T.
Mm.
Perry.
Lynn
And I
Bowden.
don't, yeah, sure, him too. Lynn Bowden Jr. So
A.T.
we're at a point,
Perry?
Dave. Are you
Rookie
start?
A.T.
Yeah,
Perry, maybe?
yeah. I mentioned them
Oh,
and like
alright.
those three guys. Like, is there A.T. Perry, Keith Kirkwood, Lynn Bowden? Are you gonna if none of the normal starters can go? Are you plugging any of those guys into your lineup with any sort of confidence?
But week 13 has a lot of big tight ends on bye, all right? Isaiah Likely, a guy that we've been talking about as a streamer. Baltimore Ravens are on bye this week. Dalton Kincaid, a plug-and-play tight end one, on bye this week. Chicago Bears and Cole Kmet are on bye this week. Michael Mayer's on bye this week. TJ Hawkinson's on bye this week. So Juwan Johnson maybe makes for kind of a sneaky play if you're looking to stream tight end this week. Obviously, Taysom Hill is going to see a ton of touches if Michael
Yeah.
Thomas and Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave, all these guys are out. The biggest beneficiary is probably going to be Alvin Kamara, who has just been a check down merchant, just getting peppered with these short throws from Derek Carr. But Taysom Hill is the guy who I think sees his role grow a little bit. But I think Juwan Johnson is a guy that you can stream. He can play out wide, he could play out of the slot. He's a great route runner, great pass catcher, and he could realistically be number 2 behind Alvin Kamara in targets in this matchup. So with what was it, 4 or 5 guys I mentioned are kind of plug and play tight end ones this week on bye, Juwan Johnson is a priority pickup for anybody looking for some help.
There we go. See, we keep just adding more and more guys to this waiver wire list. It's just tons of value all week long. You mentioned tight ends that are now easily startable. Pat Freiermuth, 9 receptions for
Ooh,
120 yards, clear target leader for the Steelers, 11 targets. The Pittsburgh Steelers defeat the Cincinnati Bengals 16-10 in what was, I mean, it wasn't a high scoring game for them, but they finally got yardage and we finally saw some players actually go out there and look good. Pat Freiermuth was one of them. We really didn't see much from the wide receivers, but then the running backs, we saw a good workload for each of them. Jalen Warren, 16 opportunities. Najee Harris, 15 opportunities. We saw a lot of usage for these guys, and Najee Harris actually ended up being the guy that was like one of the biggest benefactors of this whole game.
Yeah, that was kind of surprising. I think a lot of people, especially with the pregame reports, which I just got to say, when we get these pregame reports on Sunday morning where they say this guy's going to have a huge role or this guy's going to see more touches, is it ever true? Like, that is the biggest trap
Rarely.
in fantasy football, is
We
falling
had this. We
for
had
a
the same
Sunday
thing with
morning
the Bears
report.
game. We had the
Yeah.
same thing with the Bears game where they said Khalil Herbert will be the starter and get an increased role, and then that
Remember a
went by the
couple weeks
wayside.
ago when they're like, oh, TJ Hawkinson's banged up and he's only going to be used in emergency. And then he goes for like 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, just don't fall trap to these Sunday morning reports ever. Like, just don't. I think that's been like my biggest takeaway from the last few years. Don't trust Sunday morning reports because they said like the biggest priority this week is going to be getting the ball in Jalen Warren's hands more often. And then Najee Harris has by far his best game of the season. So I don't want to read into it too much because we know Jalen Warren is still the better running back. This is just kind of one of those frustrating splits where I think you're kind of looking at both guys as weekly starters, kind of high end RB3s. One week, one guy's going to do good, and the other guy's going to leave you wanting more, and you just kind of got to live with it, unfortunately.
Dave, I'm taking a look at the Steelers' upcoming schedule, and it remains pretty easy. And we might be looking at the Steelers making the
Oh, yeah.
playoffs
Yeah.
and their skill players actually being usable for fantasy. They've got the Arizona Cardinals, the New England Patriots, the Indianapolis Colts, Cincinnati Bengals, Seattle Seahawks. Then they get a week 18 matchup against the Ravens. That doesn't count for fantasy unless you make your championship in week 18. By the way, don't do that. If you're a league commissioner, don't do that. Week 18 championships are not cool.
And I just got to say,
It,
in my 3 up, 3 down article this weekend, I wrote about Kenny Pickett as being a trending up player. I think the box score, I think he only put up, 11 fantasy points or something like that, but had a pretty big game as a passer. And I think that there are going to be brighter days ahead here. I kind of lumped in, I didn't want to write about every Steelers player, but I wrote about Kenny Pickett as a trending up player, but kind of lumped in Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth, and things are definitely looking up for the Steelers offense. Not that they've been freed from the shackles of Matt Canada.
That's all it took. Just sacrifice Matt Canada to the fantasy gods. That's all it was. On the other side of the ball, Jamar Chase. Dave, it sucks because I think we have to kind of look at him in the same vein as we do with Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, and unfortunately, maybe even worse than that. Maybe something will get figured out here where he'll get more target volume. But it's a good wide receiver that's going to probably lead his team in targets each week on a bad offense with a bad quarterback, and the targets just aren't good. And even in this game, I don't know if you saw, but 2 of Jamar Chase's catches were these tipped balls where he did all the work. The ball got tipped up in the air by a defender, and Jamar Chase had to go find it, catch it, and then try to make something happen afterwards. Jake Browning, I get it. He's a rookie. It's his first official start, and we weren't expecting much from him, but this, I think, really kills the Jamar Chase fantasy value. And then not to mention T. Higgins coming back as well. So I'm not that excited about Jamar Chase rest of the season here.
Jamar Chase, defensive player of the week. Is that what we could call him? I mean, yeah, it's gonna be rough. And I think you said it best, kind of looking at him like Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson and a very talented guy with not so great quarterback play. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. Those are the guys you just got to plug into your lineup because at any point in time,
because you
Jamar
have to
Chase can get
start.
his hand on a ball, yeah, and he could score an 80
Yeah,
yard
you have to
touchdown.
start him.
And yeah, and then you're looking at 30 points on your bench going, why did I bench Jamar Chase? But you also got to live with the games where he sees 12 targets and has 3 catches for 21 yards because those are going to happen as well. And it sucks. But injuries are a part of the game and we just need to navigate through them. And I don't think anybody expected Joe Burrow to go down for the rest of the season. And that just kind of dries up any value for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And I mean, I don't even know if you're starting T. Higgins at this point. I mean, when he comes back from injury, you're starting Jamar Chase, but I don't know if you want to start Jake Browning's wide receiver too, a guy who has already been extremely volatile with Joe Burrow in the lineup. So I think Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon are the 2 guys that you're starting here, but any hopes for Irv Smith or Andre Yosevich or Trenton
What? No.
Irwin or any of these
Gross.
guys that we were looking
Yeah.
at as like deep weekly streamers or anything like that, throw it out the window. It's Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon, and even they are going to be pretty rough assets.
You mentioned T. Higgins, and I get it by name value alone. This might sound crazy, but if we're this worried about Jamar Chase, who's catching 4 passes and 2 of which he basically had to go and steal from someone else, I don't know that you're ever going to be comfortable enough to start T. Higgins. I think you're going to be
Yeah,
doing the
that's
Gabe
what I'm
Davis
saying.
thing,
Yeah.
where if he does have a blow up game, you're going to chase that, and then he's not going to have that because Jake Browning I mean, I think that T. Higgins might actually be droppable if you need to go and get
Ugh.
other players to start. And I hate to say that because T. Higgins is such a good player. And I hate when this gets taken out of context in fantasy football. Just because we say you can drop a player or
I'm
not to start a
already
player does not
making
mean.
a graphic. Alfredo Brown said to drop T. Higgins from your
Yeah, there you
fantasy
go.
lineup, and I'll
Do it.
share it right after he has his
Thanks.
25-point game next week.
I appreciate you. Really, really, it's awesome. I'm sure everyone in the comments is going to love it too. But uh, listen, we're at a point where it's not about if the player is good or not. We know T. Higgins and Jamar Chase
Yeah.
are good, but this is just a really bad situation, Dave.
I think the
Uh,
thing I'm most excited about when discussing T. Higgins is trying to figure out where he's going to play next year because, he's going to hit free agency, and I don't know if they've got the money to keep him around in Cincinnati. There are a lot of teams that can get much, much better with a guy like T. Higgins there. I mean, talked about it for years. Like, this is what Kansas City is missing. It is a wide receiver 1. And every time there's a free agent available, we say maybe Kansas City's going to be in play for him. Like DeAndre Hopkins, 31 years old, he would have been great in this offense. But if they can plug in a young, talented alpha receiver like T. Higgins into that offense, whoo. And then you want to just talk about the rivalry with the Bengals and the Chiefs and what T. Higgins switching teams would do to that rivalry. I don't know if there's anything I want to see more this offseason than T. Higgins going to Kansas City.
well, we could actually see him go to this next team that we're talking about, Carolina at Tennessee. T.
Mm,
Higgins, he's a Clemson guy. I know.
mm.
It doesn't sound great, but how often do these guys go and sign in places where we're like, ugh, well, that just killed his fantasy value. But T. Higgins, sorry, not T. Higgins. I'm done with T. Higgins. Look what you did to me. You ruined me. Carolina Panthers at Tennessee Titans. Carolina Panthers were honestly so bad in this game that David Tepper was shouting
I
expletives
heard. Yeah.
in the tunnel, and then he just went and fired head coach Frank Reich the next morning. Tennessee Titans, though, on the other side, Derrick Henry, 18 carries, 76 yards, 2 touchdowns. It wasn't always pretty. Like, don't get me wrong. It was not always pretty. There was a lot of those 1 yard runs, 2 yard runs, and then a 19-yard touchdown, and then, another touchdown later on in the game. And Derrick Henry, he got his touches like he needed to, especially in this game. And we kind of knew that was going to happen because the Carolina Panthers were such heavy underdogs and because they are so bad against the run. We kind of knew that was going to happen. Derrick Henry, I think he's one of those guys. Again, this point in the season, he remains a player that you're just going to
Yeah.
keep starting. You're not going to ever bench him. But his teammate, though, DeAndre Hopkins, this is a guy that I think we do have to have a conversation about, that you might be wanting to drop him. Or not drop him, but you probably won't be starting him every single week anymore. Since that 3 touchdown game with Bill Levis, that's what we're going to call him from now on. He lost Will Levis. He's back to Bill Levis. The last 4 games, he's been averaging 3.5 receptions, 48 yards. He's wide receiver 32 behind Khalil Shakir, Romeo Dobbs, Rashee Rice. DeAndre Hopkins is no longer a set it and forget it wide receiver, and with Billiam Levis there, I don't know that I can trust him at any point throughout the season, Dave.
Yeah, I mean it's been tough looking at the game log right now. 10.5 against Pittsburgh isn't going to kill you. He had 15.9 against Jacksonville when he was able to find his way into the end zone. But yeah, I mean Nick Westbrook Akine had more catches than DeAndre Hopkins last week. It's just I feel like that's the theme of this season has just been awful quarterback play. I mean, there are so few quarterbacks that can support productive offenses for multiple players. And we have seen all these very talented receivers that are dealing with awful quarterbacks. And it's making for a really, really tough fantasy season with a lot of highs and a lot of lows. I don't know if many people are in a position where they can cut or bench DeAndre Hopkins, but let's be honest. DeAndre Hopkins was getting drafted in the 4th round of fantasy drafts. If you drafted DeAndre Hopkins, unless you got really lucky with some waiver pickups, you're probably not looking at a playoff run anyway. So, yeah, DeAndre Hopkins was a pretty rough draft pick this year outside of that one big game that he had. I don't know if many people are in a position where they can afford to bench him, but like I said, theme of this show is good wide receivers and
Sadness.
bad quarterbacks. Yeah.
The theme of this show is sadness. That's all
Yeah.
it is. Week 13 sadness now. On the other side of the football for the Carolina Panthers, Adam Thielen has been a guy that it was good for a while, then bad.
No,
Sorry,
it's
I'm getting all
really bad.
choked up. Yeah, I'm getting all choked up talking about Adam Thielen here, but he's got a good matchup next week against Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Right.
Are you still going to start Adam Thielen next week? I got some names for you, Dave.
Yeah. I mean, he's had double digit targets in what, 5 of his last 6 games or 5 of his last 7 games. Like the usage has been there. And last week it wasn't. This is another, like a good wide receiver with a terrible quarterback. I mean, Thielen hasn't looked bad this year. Like I think a lot of people were talking about him being dust just because he was kind of in the shadow of Justin Jefferson, and maybe it was the usage too. Like he led the league in routes run last year. Maybe those legs just couldn't hold up to the snap share and the usage that he was getting in Minnesota. Now he's getting some breathers. He's on the sidelines every now and then. When he's on the field, he actually looks crisp and he looks like himself. But can you start anybody on this Bryce Young led Carolina Panthers team? Like even Chuba Hubbard, like, yeah, you're hoping that he can find the end zone, but if he doesn't, he's hurting you. Jonathan Mingo has been terrible. Hayden Hurst was a guy that we were hoping maybe he could be that, like, rookie quarterback's best friend at the tight end position. He hasn't really done much of anything at all. I think this whole Carolina Panthers offense is just something to avoid in fantasy. And if you got to get desperate and start anybody, I think Adam Thielen's the guy. But outside of Adam Thielen, this is just a bad offense.
Yeah, I think going forward, he's probably in that wide receiver 3 range. I think he's probably outside of the top 24 on a weekly basis. Depends probably on the bye weeks, but like you said, the targets are there. Just the production's not always consistent. Dave, another, I guess, pillow fight of the week here. New England Patriots at the New York Giants. This was another one.
This week's slate of games sucked. Like, let's just
Yeah,
call it like
it
it
was.
is, man.
That's
Thanksgiving
really
was
killed.
brutal. Ugh.
That's really killed the theme of the show here. Like, it's sad. We're talking about games where it's like 10-13. The quarterback threw for 150 yards. Your best receiver got 4 catches. Like,
Let me just put a
it's such
bow
a
on this
gross week.
awful week with last night's game, which was probably the most painful game of the season to
Yeah.
watch. Like, this is just a bad week of football. And
A little
meanwhile,
bit.
like compared to college, like we had some of the most exciting college games of the season on Saturday, like an awesome week of college football, and just flush this NFL week down the toilet.
Yeah. Also, we're on pace here for our longest episode ever, considering how long it's
Sorry,
taken us to
I'm
get to this
rambling.
sad week.
My bad.
No, you're good. You're good. It's just, of course,
Yeah, an
like the
hour and a half
saddest
of
week
just trash.
of just like, yeah, like let's just cry into a microphone for 90 minutes. But this New England Patriots New York Giants game, one positive note here, we finally saw a lot of usage for Ramondre Stevenson, who gets 26 touches. And the bad news is that it's still the Patriots offense, and they're not really going anywhere with Bailey Zappi, who now takes over at quarterback, Mac Jones benched. And I think Mac Jones is probably done for the rest of the year. Dave, like I don't really, unless Bailey Zappi gets hurt, I don't see a scenario where Mac Jones gets back in there.
Did he try to get himself benched? Is that what happened in this game?
He really,
He
I
just went
tweeted out
out,
at one
like,
point.
he was hitting defenders in between the numbers. Like, I think he just said, I don't want to do this anymore." And he just went out and played as poorly as possible and said, "All right, I'm just gonna collect my paychecks for the rest of the year."
That interception that you're talking about where he hit the defender just square in the chest, I tweeted out, like, I think that's his last pass as a starter for the Patriots. And then they trotted him out there again, and he
On the
throws
next drive,
another
yeah.
interception. And it's
Yeah.
just like, what are we missing? Like, yeah, get the guy out of there. Not that Bailey Zappi was any better. I think they were showing that his like average depth of throw was -2 yards at one
Uh-huh.
point because it's just everything was behind the line of scrimmage. This is another team. Patriots, Panthers, some of these offenses and these players, I'm just going to
Giants.
avoid. Yeah, well, I guess, I guess.
Saquon,
Tommy DeVito, man, he's been looking good, bro.
Hassan
He's been looking
Paisano.
good, my bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I feel like
Jalen
this is like
Hyatt.
Tyson Bagent all over again. Like, you see this guy come out, and it's, like, kinda surprising for the first 2 or 3 weeks, and everyone's like, "Oh, did we
This is
find
a
our
little bit
guy?"
better, though.
No.
This is a little bit
Mm,
better. He's been
is
playing a
it?
little bit better than Bajan. He's been playing a little bit better than Bajan. Calm your Bears self down. Tommy DeVito, I mean, yeah, look at he's winning, man. He's winning. The only crappy thing is that he's actually pushing the Giants out of the Caleb
Right.
Williams and Drake May sweepstakes. I had an
Back-to-back
angry
wins.
Giants fan in my DM that was like, "Why are all the Giants fans happy that we're winning?" Like people are like, it's very split. It is very split. You're either pissed that they're winning or you're happy that for the culture.
Yeah. Yeah. That's enough about this game. I can't talk about this game anymore.
Jacksonville at Houston. This was actually a
There we go. Lived
really
up to the hype.
great game to watch.
Yeah.
This was a great game. This is what we should have started with. Just skipped over all the other crappy games. But Jacksonville, Houston, CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, absolute ballers. End of story. There's no notes. No notes, Dave. These guys are really good at football. You keep starting them every single week. I feel awesome about my Nico Collins trade that I just made in Dynasty. I traded, which by the way, we talk about growth. I traded Jamison Williams and a second round pick for Nico Collins so that I could pair him with CJ Stroud in my Dynasty League. I feel great
Now,
about it.
would it be a surplus of riches for the Texans to go out and get T. Higgins next year? I mean, they've already got 2 great guys in Tank Dell and Nico Collins, but why not just throw as many talented playmakers around CJ Stroud as you possibly can? They could be in the running as well. They got a lot of cap space next year. This is what you do: is build around a young quarterback. Dude, the future is bright for CJ Stroud. I don't know if you saw, I tweeted it out on Twitter yesterday. Keep Trade Cut, who I like, I think they catch a lot of flack because the rankings on Keep Trade Cut don't always align with the Twitterverse and their take lock that we see so often on Twitter. But in a lot of dynasty leagues that I'm in, people are a lot more reactive and volatile with player values. And right now, CJ Stroud is the dynasty QB3 on Keep Trade Cut. Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, and then CJ Stroud ahead of Josh Allen, ahead of Justin Herbert. I don't know if I agree with it. I think we're maybe getting a little crazy there, but
But it gives you an
absolutely
idea of
belongs
where
in
the
the top
value
5
is.
discussion. Yeah. And then they pulled up, I forget where, but somebody pulled up because I tweeted that out and somebody said, this is ludicrous. There's no way CJ Stroud should be valued ahead of Josh Allen. Somebody actually pulled the most 4 recent trades that have happened on Sleeper in dynasty leagues involving CJ Stroud and Josh Allen. Every single one of them had value added to the Josh Allen side. So that's where we're at right now, apparently, in dynasty, is that CJ Stroud is a more valuable asset than Josh Allen. Whew.
Yeah. Yeah. Just wild. Travis Etienne did not look good in this game. Everything that was going right from earlier in the season, not looking awesome. And those of you that had held on to Tank Bigsby, I mean, that ship has sailed. For that tank has sailed. Look at that. That's been done for a while. I'd say if you're trying to hold on to someone for the end of the season here, I don't know what's going on, Dave. I'm losing my voice here towards the end of the show. We've been recording for way too long, but Dearness Johnson becomes a guy that you can probably stash behind Travis Etienne if you do have him on your roster.
With Travis Etienne, we always talk about positive regression and how, this player is going to regress positively. Well, guess what? This is just a case of negative regression for Travis Etienne. He had 6 touchdowns in 3 weeks. Do you guys think that was going to continue happening all season? No. So this is just a case of negative regression. Still a good running back. Might not have looked great in this game, but I think we're still looking at Travis Etienne as a top 10 running back for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that offensive line not great over there in Jacksonville, and Trevor Lawrence. I mean, he kind of looks like he's sort of getting it together. I mean, we saw a really nice play from Christian Kirk in this game. It was a tale of two halves for Calvin Ridley, who really finally showed up towards the end of that game. But it sort of seems like there's a little bit of a shift here into the passing offense. Now, dude, Zay Jones was the skeleton key for this offense. It's the weirdest thing. He's not really doing much, but he's the skeleton key that makes it go.
It's exactly what I wrote about. Again, talking about my 3 up, 3 down article. I had Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley both as trending up players. I mean, this is crazy. In the games where Zay Jones didn't play, Trevor Lawrence averaged 13.4 points per game. He was the QB 24 in those games. Now, in the last 2 games with Zay Jones back, 32.2 points, 25.6 points. You look at the splits with and without Zay Jones for Calvin Ridley in games that Zay Jones has played. Calvin Ridley is averaging 20.6 points per game, and in the games without Zay Jones, 7.5 points per game. Like, this isn't just a fluke. I've heard Matt Harmon talk about it a lot, but it just makes sense. Zay Jones is the other guy who can win outside. So when they have Zay Jones not in the lineup, Calvin Ridley is just running on the boundaries, stretching the field, running nothing but deep routes. And then when Zay Jones is there, they can plug Zay Jones into that role. And then all of a sudden, Calvin Ridley is getting moved all over the formation. He's running crossers. He's running a much more diverse route tree. And that's what's best for his skill set. So it sounds crazy, but that really is the difference maker. When Zay Jones is on the field, Calvin Ridley gets used so much more creatively. So I was somebody who was writing off Calvin Ridley, kind of taking jabs about his production. At one point, he was a wide receiver 58 in scoring. But as long as Zay Jones is on the field, you got to look at Calvin Ridley as a top 15, top 12 option because that's the production he puts up.
Next game on here, Cleveland Browns at the Denver Broncos. Broncos have won their last 5 games. Russell Wilson in those 5 games. It hasn't been stellar, but he's been protecting the football. Looking at 9 total touchdowns, he's averaging just around 180 passing yards per game. So it hasn't been anything that's been great, but 0 interceptions. I think he has 2 fumbles lost, but I mean, we're seeing a little bit of some rushing. He's averaging about 30 rushing yards per game. It's an efficient Russ who is winning games, and it seems to be that everyone over there in Denver is buying into the Sean Payton way of doing things, and that team is winning. It hasn't been great for fantasy, but they're winning. And so, Dave, like you said earlier, Russell Wilson is a guy that you can stream or start at the quarterback position when you need to. On the other side, the Cleveland Browns, they suffer an injury to Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who takes a vicious hit. Amari Cooper gets hit, and he suffers a shot to the ribs. If you want a little bit more insight on that, you can go back to the Monday show that dropped with myself and Dr. David Chow. It's just 15 minutes talking about the injuries from the week where he can give you some insight onto that. But David Njoku seems like the only Browns player you can kind of start with confidence each week. Since week 7, he's been averaging 5 receptions, 55 yards on 9 targets. He's tight end 7 in points per game, tied with Mark Andrews during that time span.
Yeah, and I just want to say real quick, if you want a little bit more insight into these injuries, just go back to 2011 podcast when we were discussing Bountygate. Just saying, this Denver team has been taking some dirty shots, man. We have seen it all year. Just gonna
But
call it like it is.
these weren't dirty hits. These were not dirty hits.
That
It
hit
was
on DTR was very dirty. That was a late
Oh,
shot.
I'm
Yeah.
referencing the hit to Amari Cooper.
Amari Cooper. That was just a routine play, but
quarterbacks
Kareem
do
Jackson
get
has
late
already
hits.
been suspended. I mean, Kareem Jackson has been taking on the Vontez Burfict role. This is a there's been some sketchy play from this Denver defense. All I'm going to say, and I know I just upset a lot of listeners here, but yeah, David Njoku, is that who we're talking about, right? David Njoku. Yeah, I guess you can kind of look at him. The usage has been there, and again, we talked about it. Hopes for Hayden Hurst, and maybe being that the guy that Bryce Young can lean on. Well, we're seeing it with DTR over the last 3 games. with DTR, 9 targets, 15 targets, 9 targets. That is phenomenal usage. And we know that all David Njoku needs is to get the ball in his hands to make big plays after the catch. So I'm not ready to say that David Njoku is, a top 10 tight end rest of the season or anything like that. But again, we talked about all the big name tight ends that are on bye this week. If for some reason David Njoku is available, a guy who's kind of been putting up mediocre tight end 2 production all season, David Njoku is another guy that you can confidently plug in your lineup this week if DTR is cleared to play.
Final game that we're going to talk about here, the Los Angeles Rams at Arizona Cardinals. Kyren Williams, we talked about this on yesterday's episode. He's basically turned into Barry Sanders mixed with LaDainian Tomlinson mixed with Todd Gurley at this point. Like Sean McVay just does this for running backs. When he gets one guy that he really likes, he gives him the usage. 22 touches, 204 total yards, 2 touchdowns. Running back 1 on the week with only 61% of the snaps. We're not going to say a single bad thing about Kyren Williams.
No,
That's it.
quite contraire. I will say something good about
Quite
Kyren Williams.
contraire. Oh, I didn't know you spoke French. Look at you.
We talked about I was dogging him a lot early in the season for the rushing yards over expectation, which were poor. I mean, they were bad. He was dead last in the league in 3 of his first 4 starts, but we talk about how running backs can kind of get in a rhythm. Kyren Williams led the league in rushing yards over expectation last week in the final week before his injury, where I gave him his flowers and said that he looked really good. He was 3rd in the league in rushing yards over expectation per attempt. So that's back-to-back games where he has now finished top 3. He didn't play at all as a rookie. So we were looking at him with kind of a blank slate this season. And early in the year, he was struggling to hit his holes. He wasn't doing much after contact. We're seeing that change. He is looking like a much better running back right now. He didn't have the involvement in the passing game that I wanted to see this week that we talked about on our Starts of the Week show. I said, he's at his best when he's catching a ton. And this game, he didn't see a ton of passing. I mean, he did, but not by his standards, six targets, but he made up for it with rushing work on the ground. But these games coming up, Cleveland, they're a tough run defense, but I think that he'll get it going through the air. Baltimore, that game script should work in his favor. Washington, we've seen them getting gashed by running backs all year. I mean, he's got a nice schedule for the rest of the season. The one that you get scared of is week 18, where he plays against San Francisco, but you're not playing fantasy in week 18, so it doesn't matter. Kyren Williams right now is the per game RB2 behind only Christian McCaffrey. I'm eating my words and looking at Kyren Williams as a top 5 running back for the rest of the season.
Now, his teammate, which we're all a little bit worried about, Cooper Kupp, things have just been trending downwards so fast for Cooper Kupp. Since week 7, Dave, Cooper Kupp is the wide receiver 96 in points per game. I know when the mics were off, you said, I almost said this yesterday, but I think we have to have a real conversation. Is Cooper Kupp droppable? We had someone ask this yesterday in the comments of the YouTube video. I'm trying to get Jaden Reed and Rashee Rice. I might be dropping Devin Singletary and Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you can drop Cooper Kupp. I think what the Rams need to do is shut him down for a week and let him heal up. I don't know if it's just the age that's catching up to him, because when you saw him come back from IR, he looked great. He had 2 weeks where it's all right, sweet, Cooper Kupp is back. And then picked up an ankle injury, and then we saw him nursing his hamstring, and then he had another injury last week. I think it's just these injuries are piling up. He doesn't look like himself. He's struggling to separate. He's struggling to win deep. It's just not Cooper Kupp. I think much like we talked about with Austin Ekeler, these are just injuries and age kind of piling up right now. I don't think you could drop Cooper Kupp. I think the Rams need to do the smart thing, just bite the bullet, shut him down for a week, and let him come back healthy, because he clearly is not at 100% right now. So dropping him, you'll probably regret that when he has a big game and does old school Cooper Kupp things. I don't know if I'm at that point yet, unless I'm in a league with 4 bench spots and I'm really, really desperate through bye weeks. It's tough though, man. This really sucks to see, especially when we got that little taste of hope when he came off of IR and looked like the old Cooper Kupp, but it's been bad for the last 4 weeks now.
Yeah, I think that if you do need to drop Cooper Kupp for any reason, if it's for one of these big time waiver wire ads, I think it's reasonable to do, but you kind of also have to be able to live with yourself if he continues to pop off later on in the season. So it's just one of those things. Just understand who you're dropping off your waiver wire. It's one of those tough psychological things that you got to overcome in fantasy. But Dave, we're going to be back on Thursday with our week 13 starts. We'll see you guys next time here on YouTube and your podcast feeds, wherever you're watching or listening. We'll see you next time. Adios.